everyone. This is Carl, one half of the Codex Prime podcast, Fleet DJs, of course. And we are here with the legendary man himself, a local man from Rhode Island, Mr. Don McGregor. He has written for Marvel, has written Sabre, has written so many books throughout his illustrious career. Mr. McGregor, how are you doing, sir?
Don.
Don.
Oh, we're stopping this damn thing right now. It better be Don.
Don.
So you're going to put, this is going to be on your podcast, and you're going to put a link to it on the Facebook page.
Yes, sir.
All right, I'm ready.
All right. So first of all, how did you get into Marvel, being a Rhode Island man yourself? How did you get the attention from Marvel back in those days and was able to attain a job there?
Well, because I didn't work at Marvel first.
Oh, you did?
I worked at Warren magazines first.
Oh, okay.
Jim Warren did Vampirella, Creepy, Eerie magazines, and they were black and white, 8.5 by 11 magazines. So it was different from DC and Marvel, which were the other two major publishers at that time. And but I read all the Marvel books, and I read all the DC books, and I wrote letters to a lot of them. And certainly in those days, if you wanted people in the comics business to actually read what you wrote, don't send them plots. Don't send them hey, I want to talk to you about. Send them letters, and because I promise you, in those days,
right,
the editor reads those letters,
mm-hmm.
the writer reads those letters,
okay.
The artist read those letters, and they're going to get to know your name. I often wonder, the first time I did New York Comic Con, and I think that was 1969, it might have been 68. And that's when the Comic Cons, Phil Suling had started the Comic Cons in New York City. And every July 4th weekend, they had the biggest Comic Cons they're like the San Diego Con now. How the hell New York City let San Diego take the convention center when all the comic book publishers were in New York? I'll never understand. But so the first time I was there, I loved Jim Steranko, and he did the Ages of S.H.I.E.L.D. And I loved those S.H.I.E.L.D. books. So I actually had them all bound up into actual books. And so I'm in, at the convention, and there's a bunch of fans and all around Jim Steranko. And so I want to get my book signed by Jim. And Jim says, I pick it up, and once he opens he's collecting all of his books, and he sees the letters by me. He goes, "Are you Don McGregor?" I said, "Yeah," but I'm wondering, how does Jim Steranko know who Don McGregor is? I'm just a fan. I'm just walking around, And Jim says, Don, I'm having a private thing in my apartment tonight. I'm going to give you my room number. You don't tell anybody, because Jim was so popular at that time. He would have been he had just special people that he would invite, and went down to that room that night, and he had about maybe a dozen people in there. So I first met Alex Simmons, and it was just a bunch of people talking about comics. Jim did magic tricks because he's a magician, and he did some card tricks to this day. I don't know how he did them, but after meeting Jim asked me if I would write some stuff, introducing some portfolios that he was going to do. So I guess that when I met Alex, we got together, we both loved many of the same things. So even though there was I came from Rhode Island, Alex came from Spanish Harlem. Alex was younger than I was. He was maybe 18. I was 25. He was white. I was white. He's black. And we had all these things that we loved in common. It's immediately it was we were just brothers. We loved so much of the same things. So then we started doing films together.
Oh, okay.
I was working. He'd come up to Rhode Island, and I was shooting in Super 8. Because here's what I learned: if you're making movies as opposed to comics,
right?
If you write the scripts, and if you're directing the film, and you're in the film, two things happen.
What's that?
One, you always win the fights.
Okay.
So if there's a fight, the person say, Don, I could break you in half. I break every bone in your body. You and I know that.
Right.
But see, in the script it says, I win. So here's how we're going to do that. And then I would like choreograph the fight scene, and I would win. But even better, if you write the script and you direct it and you're in it, you always get the girl.
That
Now,
is true.
at 17 years old, this was infinitely preferable to real life. So now that I'm about 25, and Alex is coming, we're fooling around with doing films, and I created Detectives Incorporated for him and I to play on film.
Okay.
But Alex is a real actor. Alex is very talented at many things. And I got one thing I can do fairly well if I work really, really, really hard at it, and that's right. And tell you a story.
Gotcha. So how did you get onto working on Black Panther?
Well, wait. So what happened was, I said to Alex, let's do a comic together.
Okay.
And I wrote the first Detectives Incorporated comic.
Right.
And we had deadline problems running right up to the convention, the next New York convention. And then we went and had it all collated. Alex drew it, I wrote it. But because we were young Turks, and we didn't want to have to, like now I'm sitting at the table trying to sell stuff.
Yeah.
No, we didn't want to have to sell our book. We left it with somebody else. They had people you could actually hire to sell your book. But also at the same time, I could take my Detectives Incorporated book and I put a bright Pepto-Bismol pink cover on it. So no matter if you was over there and somebody held that book up, you would see that cover.
Correct.
Like, oh my God, look at. So as people were going up onto the panels to speak, just like they do here, I would hand them my Detectives Incorporated. So when people are on a panel, and this just holds true to the day, if there's a lot of people up there, a lot of times the people who aren't speaking, they're not listening to what's going on. They're looking at, let's say. So people would be looking at my Detectives Incorporated.
Okay.
And at one point, Jim Warren, the publisher, says to me, well, Don, he's taking questions. And I raised my hand, and he goes, he doesn't know who I am. That's just before we've met. I raised my hand, and I get put up to answer a question or ask a question. And so I get up, I said, well, Mr. Warren, because Warren was saying that he published the best comics. Nobody did comics as good as him. Right. So I stood over and said, well, if that's true, Mr. Warren, why are you publishing the crap you're publishing? She said, people ask me all the time, how do you get into the business? I don't recommend that as a way, but I swear to God,
it's a good
if I had gone up and said to Mr. Warren, Mr. Warren, I love your books. They're just the best thing. And I would just kiss you. I love you so much. Nothing would have happened.
Yeah.
Jim Warren came off that panel. And he'll tell you, I've told this story with Jim right with me. Because who in the hell are you to ask me a thing like that at a convention in pub? And then he goes, name one story that I did that was crap. And I should not have done it. To be honest, being in the business now, I wouldn't have done it. But what did I know? I'm just a kid from Rhode Island. I know nothing at that point.
Right.
So Warren says, I name a story. And then Warren said, follow me. And he takes us over, we go through the convention. And in those days, they ran movies 24/7.
Right.
Because there was no video yet or anything. This goes back to the ancient days. So now we're walking down the movie theater. There's stock in there. But he's looking down the rows. And then suddenly sees somebody, beckons him over. And this 6-foot something black guy comes out. And Jim Warren says, Billy, I want you to meet Don McGregor. Don McGregor, this is Billy Graham. Tell Billy Graham that his work is crap. Though the story I had named Billy Joe, but he didn't write it. So Warren, I think, thought he had me on the spot. And I mean, so I said, well, I didn't say the outlook was crap. I said the story was crap. So Warren, like, I think, kind of steps back and he goes, play your cards right, kid. I'll take you out to dinner tonight.
Oh, great.
Want to know how to get into comics? So I go out to dinner with Warren and Billy. Billy was the first, by the way, because when I talk about the religious leader, Billy Graham, we're talking about the first black art director in comics.
Right.
You want to know about that. The guy's important, and he will end up drawing the Black Panther and
Right.
Luke Cage, among others, at Warren. But when you see photographs of Billy and I together, they'll say we're talking about the Black Panther. He's up in the state of Rhode Island visiting me. We're 3 or 4 years even away from knowing that we're going to do the Black Panther together. So Warren says, send a subscription to me. And my first editor was Archie Goodwin.
Right.
And Archie was the editor at Warren at the time. Billy was the art director. And my first issue, my name is on the cover with Tom Sutton, the artist. And Warren never put names on the cover of the books. So a lot of people in comics thought I was a fictitious character, that I was using the pseudonym. Like, who's this Don McGregor? Who's that person? But that's how I got exposure from the lettuce pages in Marvel Comics in DC, and from then now I'm getting published in Warren there.
Right.
And essentially every story I wrote was getting bought by them. When I was coming into the city, I still wasn't intending to do comics. I was trying to sell magazine stores, and I was still playing around with film and reading books. So the comics were kind of on the outside.
Right. So
go ahead.
So with Black Panther, being the cultural phenomenon that it is, and a lot of it came from your mind. And one of the characters that you created was a key character, Eric Killmonger. What was your inspiration for such a character?
Well, remember that before I did that series, the Black Panther, was created by Jack Kirby and Stan Lee in the Fantastic Four. So T'Challa never had a story to himself. Like, he was with the Fantastic Four and had to deal with those characters and whatever guest villain that they would put in. And in those days, you could actually read all of the, like, if there weren't so many Black Panther stories that you couldn't read them all. And thanks to Jim is the one who loaned me because my Black Panther comics were back in Rhode Island.
Right.
So Jim loaned me his Black Panther comics so I could read and and I took 4 months starting to develop, well, what if I'm doing this series? And that came out of, I'd been hired on editorial. And part of what I had to do when I moved from Rhode Island to New York, part of the job was to read these reprint books that Marvel was doing in the 1970s.
Right.
And they're doing jungle action. And they're all these racist stories, just all these white jungle gods and goddesses saving the natives and everything. And I would say to them, like, how can you print this racist stuff in 1973? Well, there's an unwritten rule in comics. If you're on staff and you're a writer, they're gonna give you something to write.
Right.
It's not in writing, but because you're trying to survive on a $125 a week job in New York City.
Oh, that yeah.
Even then,
That's important. In
so
those times, that was impossible.
Eventually, they were expanding the line, and they gave me. They said, you're going to do the Black Panther and Jungle Action. And when they're going to give you 2/3 of the book, you're going to have 13 pages every 2 months. And we're going to give you Kill Raven, and that'll be another bi-monthly book, and you'll have 13 pages there. So they're not giving you a full book. You have to put backup features in it.
All right.
So then when you ask me about the Panther, it was like, okay, as I read the stories, what do they need? Well, he doesn't have a villain. He doesn't have a Dr. Doom. The Fantastic Four does.
Right.
Spider-Man has Doc Ock. Like whatever superheroes need a good villain. And T'Challa didn't have one. And I thought, well, these can't be separate stories. They have to be integrated. Because I've only got 13 pages every 2 months. And so, like, if it's a new story every single issue, well, you're going to get a new villain that's going to come in, and then, like, every issue he's going to, like, somehow either defeat the character or not, or, So I thought, well, after 3 issues, people are going to go, T'Challa, go back to America, go back to New York. Since you came back, we just have trouble after trouble. I said, well, so the trouble should start because he left Wakanda. And if then that began the creation of Killmonger
Oh,
because he needed a villain, and there needed to be a villain that when you look at Killmonger, you think, how could T'Challa beat this guy? He's just so fierce. And afterwards, by the way, going back to Killmonger here, when the character first appeared on the cover of Jungle Actions #6, editorial said you can't put Killmonger on the cover anymore.
really?
They were not used to a black character that was that angry, that was that strong, and that fierce. Like, so literally, and if you think I'm just making it up, take a look through all the covers. You won't see Killmonger again for over a year. And then there's a cover with the Chala's fighting these ice wolves, and Rich Buckler drew the cover, but he just started fighting the wolves, and I guess editorial thought, well, we got to have a human villain in there. We don't have a human villain, it's not going to sell as many books. So they put a little like action figure Killmonger between the wolves' legs,
Yeah.
and I was saying, Killmonger, he's back, and that's the first time. And then the next time is the last issue that ends Panther's Rage. Now they also Marvel did not know, editorial did not know this was going to be a novel. They wouldn't have. They never would have okayed it, even if I said, "Hey, I want to do a novel." I would have been cut down right away. That's just not. That wasn't going to fly. But because I was on staff when my book was going out, I would put down. They have stats where you can stat copy, and when the issue was going, I put down Panther's Rage continues.
Oh.
So by the time they noticed, by the time Billy Graham took over drawing the Panther, it was already in the fifth or sixth chapter. Nobody knew where this was going, but they didn't much care because they thought the books were going to die.
Oh.
The Black Panther was not an important character at that point in time, and Jungle Books weren't selling. If Joe Kubert at DC couldn't sell Tarzan in the mid '70s, well, what chance did a black jungle character have? I think they were because editorial really didn't like these books at all. Thank God for the fans.
Thank you.
Because they love it. To do these books, to do the Panther books, was to keep like blinders on, and just for over 2 years, just know what you hope to achieve when you started out. What are these books about? And I think originally I had Panther's Rage scheduled for 10 books, and it went to 13. Because like themes, the different themes, each book would hold different themes. I could bring different characters in, but there was a continuity. We were always heading someplace with all the major characters. And I think people started to identify with them. And so thank God it was like when I went to conventions, then suddenly there was all this positive reinforcement because so many fans really loved the books. And then I was getting the letters the way I used to write to Jim Steranko.
Yeah.
And see, it all ties together if you give me a chance. It all ties together. And then people would come up to me and like Dean Mulaney, who went on to do Eclipse Comics and published Sabre. Don't forget Sabre, because Sabre broke more rules than even the Black Panther.
Yeah, I noticed that. Now was Sabre after you started work?
Yes, after they fired me from the Black Panther.
Oh, they fired from us.
Because I after Panther's Rage, well, what are you going to do? And originally, I was intending to take T'Challa to South Africa and deal with apartheid.
Oh.
Now, remember, this is 1976, so you got to go into the time frame of where pop culture and America was at.
Right.
Well, by the time I was finishing these books, I was going through a divorce.
Oh.
And I was going into court to see my daughter. And I was having a lot of, constantly editorial wondering, where's the black people? I mean, where's the white people? There's no white people in this trip. I said, well, it's your mythology. You said you're doing the Black Panther set in Wakanda. You said it's a super secret society that nobody knows is there. where are the white people supposed to come from? And so this was like a contentious basis. But because I worry about all this, and from the beginning when I was like getting ready to do this first series, I said, well, if I stay with it, what would I do next? And I realized reading the books, they never mentioned his mother. They mentioned his father,
Right.
but they never mentioned the Panther's mother. And if you read Panther's Rage, I never mentioned his mother.
Right.
Because I decided, oh, I don't know why, but his mom, for some reason, is being held captive in South Africa. And I'll figure that out if I do the storyline. But when the time came, like I said, it was a really tumultuous time in my life. And I knew I could research South Africa and apartheid enough. It was going to require a lot of research. And I was emotionally just devastated. So it was 1976. It was America's bicentennial. And I thought, oh, okay, my birthday gift to America, the Black Panther versus the Ku Klux Klan.
I bought that book, loved it.
So, yeah, well, you loved it, and there were many other people that did, but there were many people on staff that did not love it. And eventually, I was fired from the book, and they said it was because I was too close to the Black experience.
Right.
And I held up these hands, and I went, you mean like these hands you're talking about? Dennis Cowan, the great artist, he's over the next booth over.
Yeah.
First time I met Dennis, I was with him and Dwayne McDuffie. We're sitting outside of some steps in San Diego at the San Diego Comic Con. And Dennis said, especially because of Sabre, he said, I always thought you were a big black guy, Don. And you're a little short white guy. You're like whiter than white. You're like Wonder Bread white. But Michael Davis, his favorite character at the time was Sabre.
Right.
I think because Sabre just broke. There were things that Sabre could do that I could never have done in the Black Panther.
Right.
And I think on top of that, he's more than every guy. Charles a king.
Right.
And so he's got to, I love his presence. And like the photograph of me and when we're together, where I told him like, you caught my Black Panther. He'll always be my Black Panther. If Sean Connery is always my James Bond, Chadwick Boseman is always my Black Panther.
That's for all of us.
So, and I had a chance to talk with him a couple of times. And there's a great shot of him reading all of the Panther's Rage comics, the Jungle Action comics,
Really?
spread out around him. It's up on the Facebook somewhere. Every once in a while when it comes back. And just great, he's got the comics all spread out around him, and he's actually smiling while he's reading one of them.
Yeah.
So Chadwick really cared about the comics. And more than a lot of the filmmakers who do movies off the comics, they seldom even acknowledge that the comic book people exist. But I'm sorry, none of this exists without the people who created it for the comics.
Right. Yeah, you are absolutely correct. And what were your feelings on Michael B. Jordan's portrayal of the character?
I thought they were great. Since I had no knowledge that the films, in fact, were going to follow my books. I mean, I threw Chala off this waterfall 40 years before they did it in the movie.
Right.
And they took the scene entirely right from the comics. The plot line is Killmonger trying to take over Wakanda. So the fact that they followed so much of it, and I know his character changes over time with different writers, as well it should. Each writer's going to bring their own viewpoint to it. So while I haven't read any of the stuff, I know Christopher Priest is such a talented guy, and the great thing about Christopher is he doesn't forget the history. He'll actually, you can get forgotten like this. All the work that went into those books at a time when no one was doing anything like that. It was a fight. It was oftentimes you were really lonely. You're like, I could think of 3 people at Marvel that liked those books and editorial. That guy's one of them. Dave Kraft, who did the Defenders a lot. Was another one of them, and John David Warner. Other than that, I don't. Most of them did not like those books.
And it's amazing to see like how your work has not only been immortalized in the books, it has been immortalized on the big screen, and now that people know, like it was from your creativity. Well, I think we're gonna wrap this up. Thank you so much, Don.
Okay.
Did
you get what you needed?
I definitely did. Thank you so much.
And we didn't curse once. There was no cursing at all. I don't think.
No, so far.
I don't believe none. I don't believe there were any. Thank God for that.
Yeah.